Good to be here with you.
So, how are you?
I'm trying to catch some sun here on the beach. It's
It's always good.
it's
A good place
always
to be.
there was a when I was growing up there was a musical group when I was growing up called the Moody Blues, and in one of their songs they said that thinking is the best way to travel. So
That's for
if you
sure.
can visualize yourself somewhere, my doctor, whenever he takes my blood pressure, he tells me before, just go to the beach for 30 seconds. And then he wants to take my blood pressure while I'm on the beach. So yeah, thank God I'm doing well. And it's much nicer on the beach than here in Toronto.
It's cold, I suppose.
So we're going to be speaking about Hanukkah today. Is that
Yes,
correct?
please. That would be very nice.
Okay, so I wanted to do a few things. I wanted to, first of all, just give a general introduction to what Hanukkah is, which I'm sure many of you know, but it's always good to review. And then to speak about maybe what relevance the holiday of Hanukkah might have for B'nai Noach, for Noahides. Um, Basically, we all know that the first holy temple in Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians. There's a dispute between secular dating and traditional Jewish dating. Secular historians say it took place about 586 BCE. In Jewish chronology, it's about 423 BCE. But we know that there was an exile to Babylon, to Bavel, that lasted basically 70 years. And then Cyrus, King Cyrus, who was the king of Persia, um, really allowed the Jews, gave them permission to return to Israel and to rebuild the Holy Temple, which they did. Unfortunately, and it's interesting that Daniel, in his prophecy about the period of the Second Temple, so in the ninth chapter of the prophet Daniel, he says that the temple is going to be rebuilt, but in troubled times, meaning that during the period of the Second Temple, it's not going to be a very peaceful time. And so, not long after the Second Temple was rebuilt, a great world power came to be, which was the great Greek Empire under their tremendous leadership. And they managed to conquer almost the entire world. And we know that um, after um, after a while, the empire broke up. Alexander the Great really was the unifier. Alexander the Great was the one that had really spread the Greek Empire to the whole world, and he actually was very friendly with the Jewish people. He was very close to some of the leading rabbis. But after the passing of Alexander the Great, the empire was split up among different groups, different powers. And Israel fell to someone named Antiochus, who was basically from the Syrian Greek uh, Empire, meaning that the Greek Empire spread to so much of the world, and part of it was into Syria. And the Syrian Greeks basically were now in control of Israel. And they were interested in spreading their ideology, which was Hellenism. Hellenism was this Greek philosophy that was actually a very profound philosophy, and they wanted to impose it upon all the lands that they conquered. And so what happened is that in the land of Israel itself, many, many Jewish people unfortunately fell victim to this ideology. They became very enticed by the ideology of the world conquerors, and they became what is called mityavnim. They became themselves Hellenists. And so you had, in effect, a civil war going on in Israel between Jews that were traditional, that were faithful to God, and Jews that were Hellenists, that really were more faithful to the Greek ideology and Greek philosophy. They were people who, unfortunately, Jewish people who opposed traditional Jewish teaching and Jewish philosophy. And slowly but surely, the Greek power, the Syrian Greek power itself, began to suppress Judaism. They began to enact laws that prohibited the practice of Judaism, of observing Shabbat, of teaching Torah, of observing the festival of the new moon, of circumcising children. There were a whole list of Jewish ritual commandments that they prohibited. And it led to a revolt. At some point, the Jewish people said, we cannot put up with this persecution. We cannot put up with this effort to basically suppress and stamp out Judaism. So, under the Maccabees, which was a family of priests, um, they basically rebelled against the Syrian Greeks and against the Jewish Hellenists, the Jewish Hellenizers. Just to give you an example of how far the Jewish Hellenizers went, as you all know, the Greeks believed in the beauty of the human body, and they would perform a lot of their games, a lot of their sporting games naked. They would, in their coliseums and in their sporting events, they would compete in the buff. And in order to do that, these Hellenistic Jews, these mityavnim, they went through a very painful procedure to reverse their circumcision because they didn't want to look very Jewish. They wanted to basically erase the evidence that they had been circumcised. So this was a very, very unfortunate situation. And thank God, after fighting for a number of years, the Maccabees and their small group, it was a very, very small group of rebels, they managed to vanquish and to beat back the Syrian Greeks and the Hellenizers. Now, the Greeks, in their persecution and attempts to stamp out Judaism, they took over the Holy Temple and they basically sacrificed pigs in the Holy Temple. They desecrated the temple. They really tried to turn it into a pagan shrine. So the first thing that the Maccabees did when they were victorious in their battle was to clean up the Holy Temple and to basically get rid of all of the remnants of paganism that was there. And one of the things that took place in the Holy Temple every day, people often don't know this, but aside from the fact that there were sacrifices, different kinds of sacrifices every day, there were the sacrifices, the daily morning sacrifice. It was also a daily afternoon sacrifice. There were sacrifices that people brought either for Thanksgiving or if they committed a sin. There were many, many sacrifices that were offered, and there was incense that was offered every day. There were meal offerings that were offered, many kinds of sacrifices. But in addition, there was a menorah. There was a seven-branched candelabra that was lit by the priests every single day. It was lit every single day. And unfortunately, when they came and they rededicated the temple, they were only able to find a 1 day supply of oil. They only were able to find a 1 day supply of oil that was uncontaminated, meaning the Greeks had contaminated all of the oil. They had used it for idolatrous purposes. And once they used it for idolatrous purposes, you couldn't use that oil anymore. They were able to find one small cruse of oil that was sealed with the seal of the high priest, and they were able to light the menorah. The problem was that that was only a 1 day supply of oil, and the place where oil was produced was 4 day journey away. So they wouldn't be able to get new oil until 4 days, but then they had to come back 4 more days. So they were going to be without oil for 8 days. And a tremendous miracle took place that this 1 day supply of oil burned for 8 days. It lasted for 8 days. And this was the great miracle of Hanukkah. And it's the basic reason why, in celebrating Hanukkah, the tradition is that we light our, not menorah, we don't have a seven-branched menorah. We have basically an eight-branched or a nine-branched. I'll discuss in a minute why it might have 9 branches, but we have an eight-branched what's called a Chanukiah, a special uh, thing in which we light for the holiday of Hanukkah. And the custom is we light basically candles or oil each of the 8 nights of Hanukkah. The purpose of lighting the menorah is for the important principle of Pirsume Nisa, which is the publicity and the spreading of awareness of the miracle that God did. One of the most important things that we have in Jewish teaching is the idea that if God performs a miracle to demonstrate his reality and his providence over the world, we don't want people to forget about that. We don't want it to be something that basically is people are unaware of. So it's very important in Jewish teaching to publicize miracles. And so we publicly light these Chanukiot, and we do it where it's visible to the whole world. The whole world can see our candles burning, and it publicizes the miracles that took place back at that time. The Hanukkah story, basically, the miracle took place around the year 139 BCE, about 139 BCE. Now, just briefly, what relevance is there of Hanukkah to Noahides? And can they observe the holiday of Hanukkah? So the truth is that Hanukkah is a rabbinic holiday. Hanukkah is a holiday that does not appear in the Bible. It's not a biblical holiday. It's a rabbinic holiday. And the rabbis instituted, with the authority that they had, the requirement for Jews to celebrate this holiday, primarily again, by lighting candles each night of the holiday. Non-Jews, Noahides, are not obligated to observe this holiday, meaning they're under no obligation, no spiritual religious obligation to observe Hanukkah. However, they can certainly participate in the holiday in the following possible ways. First of all, it's always appropriate to study the writings about the spiritual significance of Hanukkah, meaning that there are many, as we're going to see, I'm going to share with you, there are many deep spiritual concepts that are wrapped up in this holiday. And these concepts, these ideas, are ideas that certainly non-Jewish people can learn from. They can be inspired by. They can incorporate into their lives. So certainly studying the story of Hanukkah and studying the writings about the spiritual meaning of the holiday are appropriate activities for Noahides. Secondly, reciting psalms in honor of this day. There are certain psalms that are considered to be appropriate for the holiday of Hanukkah, like Psalm 30, which is a psalm for the dedication of the temple. And that's what happened on the holiday of Hanukkah. They rededicated the temple. The word Chanukah, by the way, means dedication. And so because the holiday is a dedication after the temple had been desecrated, so reciting Psalm 30, which is a psalm for the dedication of the temple, always an appropriate psalm to say. Some people say as well Psalm 33, Psalm 67, Psalm 91, Psalm 133, and others. It's always appropriate to recite psalms on any holiday, any day of the year. It's also not inappropriate for people that are not Jewish, for Noahides, to eat traditional foods that commemorate the miracles of holiday. Now, before I get to the traditional foods, let me also say that there's nothing wrong with Noahides lighting candles for Hanukkah. Nothing wrong because they would be publicizing the miracle, which is a good thing to do. The only thing is that Noahides should not say a blessing, which Jewish people say, that says that we were commanded to light these candles. Again, Noahides are not commanded to light the candles. They're under no obligation to do it, but voluntarily, if they desire, they could light candles Even in a Chanukiah, they can light in the same kind of candle holder that Jews use. Just don't say a blessing, pronouncing the idea that they're fulfilling a religious obligation. Now, because the lighting of the candles is primarily to publicize the miracle that took place and to basically, for the whole world, to make them aware of God's reality and God's providence. So the traditional foods that Jewish people eat on Hanukkah are foods that are basically made with oil. So, for example, frying potato pancakes in oil. Well, the miracle took place through oil, the burning of oil that lasted 8 days instead of just one day. So, eating those kind of foods, donuts which are fried in oil, that's fine. That's okay. That's wonderful, especially for kids to get them, into the mood if they want to participate. Eating traditional foods is cool, wonderful. Also, giving tzedakah, giving charity in honor of the holiday is, again, always a wonderful idea. And some people say that even giving gifts to children, if that will help children feel better about themselves and about being Noahides and about participating in the holiday, certainly giving gifts, some people say it should be a monetary gift, to give them a monetary gift that they should be trained to themselves give to charity, to give to tzedakah. Although I personally feel that if you buy them another kind of a gift, like a book or a toy, it's not the worst thing in the world. Now, in the time that we have remaining, what I'd like to do is share with you an idea that I have about Hanukkah when I was thinking about what might be uh, the spiritual theme of this holiday. What might Hanukkah be all about? When you're trying to really penetrate this holiday, what's the message? What's the idea? So, one of the things that we see every single year, Hanukkah always falls out during the time of the year when we read the story of Joseph in the weekly Torah readings. You know that we read the entire 5 books of Moses over the course of a year. And we know that in the book of Genesis, starting with chapter 37, going until the end of the book of Genesis, it's all about the story of Joseph. It's the longest story in the book of Genesis, one of the longest stories in the Bible. So every year, the holiday of Hanukkah falls out sometime during the time when we're reading about the story of Joseph. And I think it's not purely coincidental. I want to share with you the first verse about the story of Joseph. Well, one of the first verses, not really the first. The first discusses his birth back in chapter 30 in verse 24, which I'll speak about in a minute. But the whole saga of Joseph begins in chapter 37, verse 2. And it says there, Eila Toldot Yaakov. Now, the word Toldot is hard to translate. It could mean generations, progeny. It could mean legacy, the story of. So I think that it's going to be clear in a minute that the translation here is not generations or progeny, but the translation here is going to be the legacy, the story of. And it says these are, or this is the legacy of Jacob. This is the legacy of Jacob. And then it says something strange. It says Joseph was 17 years old when he was basically taking care of his father's flocks with his brothers. Now, this is the proof that you wouldn't translate Toldot here as generations or progeny, because if it was going to tell you these are the generations of Jacob, it would list all the children. It would say Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, etc. So it says, Eila Toldot Yaakov, this is the legacy of Jacob. What's the legacy of Jacob? It says Joseph was 17 years old when he began to take care of the flocks of his father with his brethren. So it's a pretty strange sentence when you want to think about the legacy of Jacob. And one of the great Hasidic masters, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Rimanov, who died in 1815, he gave a beautiful explanation of this sentence. It says, this is the legacy of Jacob. This is the legacy of Jacob. Joseph. It goes on to say Joseph was 17 years old. But Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Rimanov says the legacy of Jacob was Joseph. Now, what is Joseph? It's not just someone's name, Joe. There's a meaning behind the name Joseph. When he was born, you have to remember his mother, Rachel, had been barren. Rachel did not have any children, and the co-wife, Leah, was chock full of children. Leah was, had plenty of children. And it was very difficult for Rachel, who was ultimately Jacob's favorite, most beloved wife, not to have any children. Finally, she gives birth to Joseph, and she names him Joseph. What does Joseph mean? So Joseph means to increase, to add, to add. And she called his name Joseph. This again is chapter 30, verse 24. She called his name Joseph, saying, may Hashem add on for me another son. Imagine what a weird name that is, right? She has her first child and she names it, I want another one. That's the name, that's the meaning of Joseph. I want another son. So Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Rimanov said that if you want to understand what is the essence of Jacob, and again, don't forget Jacob is also named Yisrael. Jacob is, in a sense, a name that's given to the people of Israel in general. We, in the Bible, are called the nation of Jacob or the nation of Israel. So Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Rimanov says, what is the legacy? What is the essence of the Jewish people? What is it all about? And he says, it's all about Yosef, which means doing more, going beyond. Basically, the word I would use is transcending, meaning that in life, people sometimes will go so far, they might get stuck at some level of spiritual growth. The idea of Yosef means always wanting to do more, always wanting to add on, always wanting to increase their spiritual growth, never being satisfied with the level of closeness they have to God, always wanting to get closer and closer and closer. This is the idea of Yosef, that the idea of Yosef is to increase, to do more, to go beyond, to transcend. And Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Rimanov says that is the legacy of Jacob. That's the legacy of the Jewish people. We always strive for more. We always strive to increase our closeness to Hashem, to increase our spiritual development. And now we understand Hanukkah, because we're going to see that everything about Hanukkah fits into this idea of transcendence. So I'm going to share with you 7 ideas, and then I can take questions. So there are 7 things about Hanukkah that we need to observe. Number 1, in the liturgy, when we speak about what Hanukkah is all about, the liturgy says that it's a day where there was Rabim Biyad Ma'atim, which means the many into the hands of the few. Now, if you think about it, the Syrian Greek army was a huge professional army. Who was fighting them? A small group of priests. They were not a professional army. They were vastly outnumbered, and yet they were able to go beyond what would normally be expected of them, meaning you wouldn't normally expect a small group of ragtag priests, not a professional army, poorly equipped, to vanquish a huge professional army that had conquered the whole world. And yet, these few Hashmonayim, these Maccabees, they went beyond. They transcended what would normally be expected of them. They did more than what would normally be expected. So that's an example of, again, Hanukkah illustrating the theme of going beyond, of transcending. Also, I mentioned the miracle of Hanukkah was that a small supply of oil should have lasted 1 day. It went beyond what it should have been able to do. It transcended its normal capabilities, and that 1 day supply of oil lasted for 8 days. Again, illustrating this theme of going beyond, of doing more, of transcending. Third, how do you celebrate Hanukkah? So believe it or not, there's a debate in the Talmud. There's a debate about how to light the Chanukiah. The school of Shammai, one of the major schools in the rabbinic world, said that you light 8 candles the first night, 7 candles the second night, 6 candles the third night, etc. You go from 8 all the way down to 1. Beit Hillel, the house of Hillel, the school of Hillel, says no. You go from 1 candle the first night, 2 candles the second night, 3 candles the third night, 4 candles the fourth night, etc. In Hebrew, it's called Yosef the Holech. You go and you increase. So again, this is the idea of increasing, of Yosef, of doing more. You don't go down, you go up. And that's the law. The law is we follow the opinion of the school of the house of Hillel to go from 1 to 8, not the school of Shammai, which goes from 8 to 1. A fourth example, and this is an amazing example. In Jewish law in general, there is an idea called Hidur mitzvah. Hidur mitzvah means beautifying the mitzvah. So any commandment that God gave us, we try to do it in a beautiful way. So if, for example, on the holiday of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, you're supposed to live in a sukkah, in a booth, in a hut, you're supposed to try and build a beautiful hut, a beautiful sukkah, and decorate it to look beautiful. And if we have a commandment to wear a talit, a prayer shawl with tzitzit, you should try and get a beautiful one. And anything we do, there's a concept in any mitzvah of hidur mitzvah, of beautifying the mitzvah, of doing it in a beautiful way. Hanukkah is unique. Of all of the things in Judaism, that Hanukkah has a next level called Mahadrin min ha-Mahadrin, beautifying the beautiful. So how does this work? So believe it or not, the basic mitzvah, the basic way of celebrating Hanukkah, the bargain basement way, is that each family, the whole family, lights 1 candle each night, and that's it. Meaning that the basic commandment of Hanukkah is that the whole family lights 1 candle the first night, and then the second night, the whole family lights 1 candle, and the third night, the whole family lights 1 candle. That's the basic way of doing it. Mahadrin, if you want to do it in a more beautiful way, then each member of the family lights 1 candle the first night, and each family member lights 1 candle the second night. And then the third night, each family member lights 1 candle. That's beautifying the mitzvah. How do you do it to Mahadrin, Mina Mahadrin? How do you absolutely supercharge this level of beautifying the mitzvah? Well, now each family member lights 1 candle on the first night, and 2 candles on the second night, and 3 candles on the third night, and 4 candles on the fourth night, etc. But this is something which doesn't apply to any other commandment, any other mitzvah in all of Judaism. This level of Mahadrin min ha-Mahadrin, meaning going beyond beautifying it to beautifying the beautiful, unique to Hanukkah. So again, it illustrates this idea of doing more, of going beyond, of transcending. Another example. The truth is, when we go through the story of Hanukkah, I told you that they only found 1 jar of pure oil that had not been contaminated by the Syrian Greeks. But there is a principle in Torah law which says, Tuma putra berabim, that when the whole community is ritually impure, then you don't need to use pure oil. They could have used impure oil. Now, why would the whole community be impure? Well, the reason is basically because they had just fought a war that lasted for a few years. During a war, everyone comes in contact with a dead body. And when you come in contact with a dead body, you are ritually impure. And if you come in contact with someone who had contact with a dead body, you're ritually impure. So the assumption was that at that time, everyone had become ritually impure. If that's the case, they didn't need to use only pure oil that had not been contaminated. They could have used impure oil because the whole community was impure. But They didn't want to do it on just any level. They didn't want to do it on a level where they could have gotten away with using any oil. They wanted to do it in a better way. They wanted to go beyond what they could have done. They wanted to do more. They wanted to do it in the very best way possible. So again, their behavior showed their desire to transcend, to do more, to go beyond, to increase. Another example is that the number of the holiday of Hanukkah is the number 7. Now, the Maharal from Prague, the great Jewish philosopher and mystic who lived in Prague for many years, he wrote a lot about the meaning of the numbers. And he says that the number 7 is a number that symbolizes the physical world, the natural physical order. The world was created in 7 days. There are 7 colors in the rainbow. There are 7 notes in at least a Western musical scale. 7 is always a number of the completion of the natural order. When things have a complete, we have 7 days in the week, and we have the sabbatical year cycle. 7 is this number of completion of the physical world. 8, the Maharal says, is a number that goes beyond the physical to the level of the metaphysical, to the spiritual, to the supernatural. That's why a boy is circumcised at 8 days. In 7 days, he becomes a regular little boy. On the 8th day, he's raised up to another level. The number 8 always, for example, in the book of Psalms, there's a special instrument that's played in the Messianic age called the Shminit, the 8-stringed harp or the 8-stringed lyre. And so it's not just a regular harp, it's a special 8-string harp because that is going to be played in the Messianic age. So the Maharal says that the number 8 always signifies going beyond the natural physical realm to the realm of the metaphysical and the supernatural. And finally, one last example is the physical symbol of Hanukkah is the flame. Now, when you think about it, the flame is the only thing, at least I can't think of anything else, that by nature it moves up. Most things in the world by nature will fall down because of gravity. But the flame, if you look at it, is always licking up. It's always just going up, striving higher and higher and higher. That's the nature of the flame. So I think if you look at all these elements of Hanukkah, each one illustrates this theme of going beyond, of doing more, of transcending, of not being satisfied with just whatever level you can get away with, but always striving for more and more and more and more. And I believe personally that this is a concept which is relevant to both Jews and to Noahides. None of us should ever be satisfied with the level that we're at. We should always be striving for more, seeking more, trying to grow higher, trying to become more spiritual, trying to get closer to God. I believe that this is an important lesson for all human beings, that transcendence should be your motto in life. It should be not just the motto of the Jewish people. This idea of Yosef should be something that all human beings strive for.